In the cold months of November 1919 and January 1920, Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer and John Edgar Hoover, the first director of the FBI, held a series of raids against immigrants in America. These raids targeted people with extreme left-wing political views, such as communists, anarchists, and mostly German and Russian immigrants. The attacks covered 33 cities and towns in 23 states as agents beat, arrested, and deported these suspected terrorists. The raids were known as the Palmer Raids, and they helped to redefine and organize government actions in America. Laws regarding immigrants and new agencies, such as the FBI, were formed by the attacks. The Palmer Raids were primarily due to hyper-nationalist sentiment, xenophobia, and need for national security. The Palmer Raids were a series of raids proposed against immigrants suspected of plotting to rise up and overthrow the government. Galenist, Italian anarchists, sent 30 letter bombs in April and June of 1919 to various important figures in America. The attempt was unsuccessful. Even though it managed to injure some people, no one actually died. The second attempt in July of 1919 contained 8 bombs on a larger scale. Sent to 8 different cities, one killed a man, and another ended up on the doorstep of Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer. With Palmer furious and the country worried, the Palmer Raids began. In 1919 to 1920, after World War I, United States citizens felt a strong urge of hyper-nationalist sentiment. Americans felt that hiring immigrants for work took away from Americans who were trying to find work. This resentment towards foreigners created a fear in Americans stemming from World War I, as Americans feared the Germans and also the Russians after the Bolshevik Revolution. Politics did not help, however, as they altered social structures. It turned rich against poor and poor against rich, which led to an appeal of open society with diversity and difference. As for Palmer and the raids, politics, inexperience, and overreaction got the better of him and his department as they attempted to display the fundamentals of the political and social systems. Even though Americans believed that the government should prevent crime and that the government should provide safety and liberty for its people, the nation was divided in the 1920s and deep emotion was aroused. Some believed the raids were necessary and helpful as they cleansed the country of terrorists, but others thought it was unconstitutional and evil. Palmer knew that hyper-nationalist sentiment alone would not rid the country of terrorists, thus encouraging Americans to accept and support new government crime-fighting agencies. The Department of Justice felt that it needed to form a new agency to help fight organized crime. The GID, General Intelligence Division, was a newly formed anti-radicalism department within the Justice Department, which pursued the attack on the Reds, or terrorists, and said, "No alien attempting to overthrow the government will escape arrest or deportation." Both departments felt it necessary to fight against these people, because Americans were already beginning to fear the worst, an overthrown government and a change in America. The GID became the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, in order to improve social order and to keep government institutions in place. Due to the Palmer Raids, the FBI was formed because the manpower and funding was available to expand and create a national and international crime-fighting organization that teaches and protects civil liberties and constitutional rights. Also, it gave the Bureau experience in terrorism investigation and intelligence work. In order to boost Americans' morale, Palmer became the leader of the 100% Americanism philosophy. As immigrants started pouring in from around the world, Americans began to fear foreigners, or xenophobia. The largest group of immigrants feared was the Russians, or Reds, partly because the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia had happened not too long before, but also because Palmer believed that Trotsky influenced and sent immigrants to America to start organizations and change American values. Due to this belief, there were 3 main groups of immigrants targeted: Russian immigrants, German immigrants, and immigrants who had just come to the United States. Many claimed to be in America to be taking advantage of educational programs and social opportunities, which many Americans believed to be untrue. This created tension between the fearful Americans and the immigrants, resulting in Congress to limit the number of immigrants in the United States. One of the most famous and most controversial cases during the Palmer Raids was the case against Italians Ferdinando Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, in what was known as the Sacco-Vanzetti case. Accused of armed robbery and 2 counts of murder, both men were treated unfairly, were not given a fair trial, and were executed by the electric chair on August 23, 1927. With the outcome of this case, immigrants began to realize what was happening and started to act by protesting, making Americans' fears more of a reality. Not all immigrants captured by the Palmer Raids were killed, however. After they were arrested, they were deported by the Department of Justice and put on a ship called the Buford, nicknamed the Soviet Ark or Red Ark. Most Russians were deported because of their involvement with the Union of Russian Workers. For example, 184 of 199 Russian immigrants were deported because of their membership to the Union. Americans feared this group was a hub for communists and anarchists attempting to overthrow the government. Due to American xenophobia, victims of the Palmer raids ranged from violent revolutionaries to pacifist advocates of non-resistance. Americans' fear of foreigners gave Palmer the opportunity to begin the raids and have American support, as he and his department began to victimize immigrants in his case against the Reds. These actions taken by Palmer and his department made the government reconsider its immigrant policies in the Constitution and gave them an excuse to do so. Although Americans feared foreigners, they also felt they needed national security, which forced the government to act. As Palmer addressed the country, he said,
"I was shouted at from every editorial sanctum in America from sea to sea. I was preached upon from every pulpit. I was urged, I could feel it dinge into my ears, throughout the country to do something, and do it now."
As the need for national security grew, Congress pushed for a cure, giving Palmer full access and support to carry out the raids, knowing that all responsibility for the outcome would fall on Congress. As revolution started sweeping over every American institution of law and order, crime began to be the degenerate factor in society. With Americans fearing the worst and the government possibly on the verge of attack, Palmer and his department began the raids. Breaking into establishments and private homes without warrants or probable cause, using informants with wiretaps to identify leftists and radicals, beating people and threatening them either in interrogation or in front of their families, and holding them in overcrowded and unsanitary holding facilities were all entailed in the raids. Many rights were taken, including the First, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, Seventh, and Eighth Amendments. The need for national security created a nationwide panic about possible communist threats inside the United States. The fear grew when Americans began to be targeted as terrorists because they had different political views as others. The raids were not just a sporadic event executed in one day. They were planned and timed accordingly in the months of November and January. The November raids were held on the 7th of 1919, the same day as the second anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. They covered 12 different cities throughout the United States. John Edgar Hoover took over the January raids, which covered 11 different cities in a span of 3 weeks. In the end, close to 4,000 to 6,000 members of the Communist Party, the Communist Labor Party, the Socialist Party, and many Russian, German, and other immigrants along with anarchists were beaten, arrested, and either killed or deported as the raids covered 33 cities and towns in 23 states. These raids, however, turned into a nightmare due to poor communication and planning on the intelligence needed. Palmer, Hoover, and Congress were criticized for the plan and the overzealous domestic security efforts. The Espionage and Sedition Acts were violated, as well as the Constitution. Due to these raids, changes were made in the Espionage and Sedition Acts to ensure the safety of immigrants and Americans and to protect individual rights. Even though the focus was on aliens, because they had fewer constitutional rights, Americans were still targeted, which created the need for national security. Ironically, Palmer and Hoover found no evidence of a revolution, but, unfortunately, the raids still happened. The Palmer raids were undoubtedly unconstitutional and morally wrong. They can be considered a violent act against immigrants looking for a new life. At the same time, they can be considered a preemptive measure taken by the U.S. government to ensure the safety of Americans and the United States. Some Americans responded to the raids positively, as they felt it was beneficial for the whole country. Others, however, felt strongly against it, as it demonstrated unconstitutional behavior towards immigrants. Because of the raids, the Espionage and Sedition Acts were edited to protect the rights of immigrants, and new agencies and policies were created. Hypernationalist sentiment, xenophobia, and need for national security all contribute to the causes of the Palmer raids. With the creation of the FBI, the enforcement of the Constitution's first few amendments, and the Espionage and Sedition Acts, the United States is able to protect its citizens and its government from persecution and unconstitutional injustices. The Palmer raids can be used as an example to show how this country has evolved politically and socially, and how equality and diversity have created this multi-ethnic country we have today.